Non si è salvato quasi nulla, sono bruciati tetto, palchi, la platea e anche la scena, documenti e arredi. Risparmiata la facciata, smozzicati nelle parti macchiate.
Time, fires, wars and man's own actions from choice or from necessity have more than once over the centuries destroyed theatres. But sooner or later man has, from choice or from necessity, rebuilt them, modifying and adapting them to his needs and to the present moment in time. And so every time they are reborn, theatres acquire a double value. They're part of our present life, but also monuments to the past. So in these, the theatres, the destinies and memories of past generations meet. After the fall of the Roman Empire, amphitheatres, stadiums, circuses and theatres became ruins. Some became marginalised and temporary refuges for beggars and prostitutes. Others were modified and transformed into palaces, fortresses, churches and squares. The structure of these classical sites of entertainment are sometimes recognisable in the modern urban landscape. The amphitheatre is discernible in the market piazza at Lucca. Piazza Navona in Rome preserves the erstwhile shape of the Stadium of Domitian. In the amphitheatre of Arles, a fortified city was embedded. The architect Baldassare Peruzzi transformed one of Rome's first permanent theatres, the Theatre of Marcellus, into a palace in the 16th century. From the 15th century onwards, the remains in Rome, and in particular the Colosseum, were places privileged by the rediscovery and restoration of the classical. A moment of wonder and one for textual rediscovery. Following the example of Leon Battista Alberti, scholars and artists studied the only architectural treatise to have survived from classical times, Vitruvio's De Architectura. The interpretation of the treatise and archaeological practice guided the dream of reconstructing the Greek and Roman theatres. The dream took shape in 1556 using the plans of the first illustrated edition of Vitruvio, edited by Daniele Barbaro and illustrated by Andrea Palladio. Throughout the Venetian region, theatrical archaeology found a complete fulfilment in the building practices. In Padova, the courtyard of the Cornaro house was a theatrical space. The gallery was built in the style of the classical theatres of Giovanni Maria Falconetto. It was used as a background for performances in which Rosante also acted. The effective resurgence of the classical theatre was planned by Andrea Palladio in Vicenza. The theatre acquired by the Olympian academics was begun in 1580, utilising the prisons of the medieval castle of St. Peter. The theatre was to complete the urban redevelopment of the port zone. Palladio wanted to transform the place into a classical piazza, dominated by Palazzo Chiericati. The architect died shortly after the start of the works in August 1580. The works regained new vigour with the election of the patrician Leonardo Valmarana as president of the Academy. On March 3, 1585, the spectators attending the opening of the Olimpico Theatre walked along this road. Another sector of the public entered directly by another entrance, which opened directly onto the lobby. Various routes led the spectators into the theatre. The orchestra pit was the area designated for the select. In the 16th century, the orchestra pit was deeper than in the present day. Palladio had wanted to recreate the vertical depth of the actual Roman theatres. The walls that skirt the stage strengthen the separation between spectators and spectacle. The other spectators would sit on the staged benching of the auditorium, in the accessible spaces of the open gallery and the balcony above it, which were designated for the less noble members of the audience. The wooden auditorium is crowned by a peristyle, which is a miniaturized reference to the colonnades placed at the top of the classical theatres, which are even today discernible in the Roman theatre of Taormina. The alternation of full and empty spaces is typical of the Palladian imagination and can be seen in the facade of the Chiericati Palace. The front of stage, conceived as part of a Grecian square, is the architectural pivot of Palladio's Vitruvian dream. Stage is defined at the sides by structures which interpret the classical element of the Vesurii. Even today, these frame the stage at Taormina. On the Vesurii rests the roof, which was reconstructed in 1914 following the original plan. Less successful, above the orchestra pit and auditorium, is the painting of a false sky, which is a substitute for the more likely original cloth drapings. The entrances reinstate the supporting arches of the Latin stage, which are the Aianua Regia, or main door. This incorporates the idea of the classical triumphal arch and hospitalia, or minor arches. It's from here that the actors made their entrances and exits. The frieze, decorated with the labours of Hercules, patron of the Olympic academics, crowns the top part of the proscenium. As for the academics, they're displayed robed in ancient dress. The ostentatious display is a self-celebratory family portrait, but also one of the most interesting sculptural groups of the 16th century. The intervention of Vincenzo Scamozzi was decisive in the completion of the work. The scenery, which we glimpse behind the front of the stage, was planned and executed by him between 1584 and 1585. The views should have depicted the 7 roads of Thebes, which were to provide the setting for Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, which had been chosen for the opening. Scamozzi changed Thebes into an idealised view of Vicenza, a typical city scene from the 16th century. The stucco decorations, seen close up, reveal a rapid and summary workmanship. However, the brackets for the lights have escaped this treatment. On these would sit small oil lamps made of glass, or tin. To illuminate the painted backdrop, over 1,000 were needed. Around 1,500 spectators participated in the opening on the 3rd of March 1585. It was carnival time. The master of ceremonies, the director, was Angelo Ingegneri. The actors, Luigi Grotto as Oedipus, Tiresias, played by Giambattista Verato of Ferrara, whilst his daughter took the role of Jocasta. At the centre of the peristyle, dominating the entire theatre, is a figure carrying the emblems of imperial power: the sceptre, the globe, and the crown of laurels. Its appearance is reminiscent of Charles V of Habsburg, as he's shown in the official representations of the time, and affirms the political beliefs shared by other Olympians like Pompeo Trissino. From the back of the scene, the spectral equestrian statue of Charles V evoked loyalty to empire and antagonism towards Venice. Loyal to the Habsburgs and the imperial ideal was Vespasiano Gonzaga Colonna, the eccentric Duke of Sabbioneta. small town in the heart of the floodplain of the Po, a few kilometres from Mantova, was realising an anachronistic dream, that of the mythical ideal city. The theatre, planned by Vincenzo Scamozzi 3 years after the inauguration of the Olimpico in Vicenza, was opened in 1590. For the first time in the modern age, there was a dedicated building for performance. Noteworthy are the differentiated entrances for the prince, for the performers, and for the courtiers. The late flowering humanist vision of Gonzaga is inscribed on the facade. Vespasiano wanted to recreate in Sabbioneta a new Rome. The motto is derived from the treatise on architecture by Sebastiano Serlio. Let's look at the auditorium, bearing in mind Vincenzo Scamozzi's plan. On one of the short sides, an atrium functions as a foyer for the court spectators. On the other is the backstage, with small rooms for actors and musicians, a plan which is attentive to the technical aspects of theatre architecture. The original ceiling, painted as a sky, was supposed to give the auditorium an open-air aspect. The auditorium, with its trend to curves and lines, updates the plan of the Olimpico of Vicenza. On the stage benching would sit the nobles. The peristyle, with the recesses and busts, is a reference to a similar Palladian element. Hercules, among the Olympian gods, is a symbol of the prince's worth. Vespasian and the women would sit in the gallery. The monochrome frescoes reveal the allegorical character of the building. The effigies of Roman emperors allude to the status of Vespasiano, a new Caesar amongst the Caesars of the past. The central monochrome, located behind the prince, is a double. It represents the Roman Emperor Tito Flavio Vespasiano, but has the features of Gonzaga, who had previously had himself sculpted as an emperor. The Roman myth continues with Castel Sant'Angelo in the frescoes, which link the auditorium with the stage. Gonzaga was entering through the triumphal arch. Above is the dedication to the Emperor Rudolf of Habsburg. The imperial entrance of Vespasiano was admired by both painted and live spectators. The balustrade recalls the idea of the stately courtyard adapted as a performance space. Musicians as well as courtiers are depicted. One masked figure with a plumed bonnet is reminiscent of the Commedia dell'arte. In the company of performers under Vespasiano's patronage worked the actor Pier Maria Cecchini, nicknamed Fritellino. Further symbolism can be seen in the triumphal arch to the left, the Campidoglio Square restructured by Michelangelo. The scenery has since been lost. It was made of wood and lit like that of the Olimpico. A static city scene with fixed perspective and enriched by frescoed vistas. At the back of the stage, a rural landscape survives, of a turret and clearly delineated bell towers on a chain of hilltops. On the right-hand side is a shop, a typical comic setting. In 1996, an imagined reconstruction of the scenery based on the buildings of Sabbioneta was opened. In this small jewel of the courts of the Po Valley, the classical peristyle, the auditorium with its curves and lines, the idea of the courtyard theatre and the dressing rooms fuse in a synthesis which is suspended between the past and the future. At some years' distance and some kilometres from Sabbioneta lived a neurotic and vindictive prince, Ranuncio I of Farnese. In the heart of the city of Parma, he'd built a gallery along the lines of that at Sabbioneta called degli antiquity, of the ancients. Around this, from 1602 onwards, was built the Palace of Pilotta. Mounting the broad imperial-style staircase, you reach the first floor. From here, crossing a small room framed by a monumental arch, you enter the theatre. Photographs, paintings and prints record the appearance of the theatre prior to the bombings of 1944, which destroyed it. The restoration has omitted the original range of colours discernible in a 19th century model. The The theatre was built between 1617 and 1618 by adapting an arms room. The plan is an elongated U-shape, a revisiting and questioning of Vitruvio's idea of a circular theatre. At that time, a very common blueprint which allowed for a flexible use of the orchestra pit, sometimes for the public, sometimes for dramatic action, as we can see in the model preserved at Drottningholm in Sweden. The architect was Giovanni Battista Aliotti, an exponent of the up-to-date school of set designers of Ferrara. Count Alfonso Pozzo collaborated with him. After the departure of Aliotti, the Marquis Enzo Bentivoglio played an important part. Amongst the painters were Leonella Spada and Girolamo Curti, nicknamed Il Dentone. The galleries which complete the auditorium are an allusion to the Palladian Basilica of Vicenza. The space for the public is also developed vertically, a solution which combined with the idea of the courtyard and other influences and leads to the theatre with boxes. The balcony of honour, reserved for Prince Farnese, seemingly derived from the peristyle of Sabbioneta, which may be considered embryonic of the future royal box. The galleries along the longer sides are not usable, even if in their design they presage the future shape of the boxes of the Italian style of theatre. The two triumphal arches between the auditorium and the stage are another element derived from Sabbioneta. They celebrated Ranuccio's predecessors Alessandro and Ottavio Farnese. The majestic proscenium arch reveals Aliotti's indebtedness to the Palladian front of the stage of the Olimpico, even more evident in the pictures prior to the bombings. In the monumental structures that frame the proscenium, there is explicit reference to the Tuscan and Emilian practice of set design. A reconstructed model of what was the Medici Theatre at the Uffizi confirms this. Even comparisons made to engravings relating to contemporary performances reveal the extent to which the spread of this use of the triumphal arch was by now an accepted convention. Above the proscenium arch, a tablet records the date of completion. In fact, the opening took place very late, almost 9 years after, on December the 21st, 1628. The occasion was the celebrations for the nuptials of Ranuncio's son Odoardo with Margherita de' Medici. A musical tour de force was performed, Mercury and Mars by Claudio Aquilini, with Now Lost Music by Monteverdi. Master of Ceremonies, the director, was the Marquis of Bentivoglio. Some musicians were placed at the foot of the apron in a protected space. This too was an expedient that would provide a model for the future. The most innovative part of the theatre was, however, the vast stage, which seemed to invite the great Baroque spectacle of the future. Alfonso Rivarola called Il Kenda and Francesco Guidi, recycling the scenery and stage machinery of Aliotti, conceived a set full of opulence and ingenuity which enriched the performance with special effects. The Grand Theatre of the Farnese, being both costly and disproportionate to the modest wealth of its owners, remained nonetheless a more or less deserted cathedral consecrated to the anachronistic ambition of a family outside the vital world of performance. It became almost a museum piece. Elsewhere, the big musical spectacle had already found a happier reception. In Venice, in the course of the 17th century, the Republic acquired a new system of theatrical building and perfected it in the following century. At the end of the 18th century, there were 7 main theatres. Theatres no longer destined for an elite public, but for paying spectators. New customers followed the princes. The melodrama with its arias and plots redefined public taste and theatrical spaces. New needs and new tastes made themselves felt. You arrived at the Venetian theatres by land or water. A few months before the fire that was to destroy it in January 1996, we too decided to arrive at La Fenice by water. It was some of the last filming to record the image of the now destroyed building.
Il Teatro La Fenice di Venezia è insieme alla Scala.
The Fenice Theatre in Venice is, together with La Scala in Milan and the San Carlo in Naples, one of the so-called temples of opera, of musical theatre not only in Italy but worldwide. It was built in 1792 by an association of nobles and Venetian citizens who wanted to rival other theatres. This was because the association had been evicted some years earlier from occupying the San Benedetto Theatre, perhaps the most beautiful of the 7 theatres which graced the city of Venice at the end of the 18th century. Evicted from that theatre, they wanted to build another. And so, in 1792, the Theatre of La Fenice was born. The architect was Gian Antonio Selva, a friend of, among others, Canova. The uneven land forced the architect to undertake a very difficult and ingenious work of levelling. In Milan, La Scala had been started some years earlier in 1776 and was completed in 1778. The facade of La Fenice echoes that of La Scala. It is in a neoclassical style, which in turn was an imitation of the Palladian fashion coming from England.
Lo stile generale non solo di questo edificio, ma anche degli altri edifici che si possono vedere in questa stessa piazza, o meglio, come si dice.
It was a style that harmonized well with the urban context defined by the older buildings from the 16th to 17th century, the church and school of Campo San Fantine. Both these buildings, as you can see, have a similar style and structure. The church was built by Scapagnino and Sansovino, the school by Contin and Vittoria. One of Guardi's drawings and an engraving depict the facade in 1792. The fire of January 1996 spared it and the outside walls. However, the elegant 18th century Apolline rooms, which had been conceived and decorated on a plan by Selva himself and which had escaped the fire of 1836, were destroyed. The interior of the theatre, which could be seen in 1995 before the last fire, was the result of numerous adaptations which during the 19th century had modified the original structure. The elliptical plan was a rare shape for the theatres of the time. After the fire of 1836, the interior was reconstructed in record time, but those were other times, by the Meduna brothers, who respected the 18th century original. Moreover, to one of the two brothers we owe the refurbishment of 1854, which beautified the parapets of the boxes with portraits of the ancient poets, allegories, cherubs, flowers, and other decorative motifs. The decorations, too, were carried out by various artists at various times. Amongst these was Giuseppe Bossato in 1828. It was Selva again who built the Imperial Box in 1808 for Napoleon's arrival in Venice, and it was subsequently restored on several occasions. It took up the spaces of 6 boxes in the prime position of the dress circle, 3 front-facing, 3 lateral. The gallery broke the temperate orderliness of the boxes, an expression of the Republic's oligarchy, and introduced the sense of absolute power so unfamiliar to Venice. Around the sumptuous central chandelier was crafted the delicate ceiling painted first by Tranquillo Orso and then by Giambattista Meduna in 1854. Francesco Fontanesi and Pietro Gonzaga designed the scenery and the curtain for the opening performance. On the 16th of May 1792, during the Feast of the Ascension, there was a performance of the Games of Agrigento from a script by Alessandro Perpoli with music by Paisiello. Amongst the actors were Brigida Banta and Giacomo David. In the 19th century, over a period of about 20 years, Giuseppe Bossato and his pupils produced over 1,000 dramas. Then came the turn of Giuseppe Bertoia, the favourite set designer of Rossini and Verdi. Amongst the first performance in a century of successes was Tancredi in 1813 and in 1823 La Semiramide by Rossini. But above all it was Verdi in 1844 with Ernani, Attila in 1846, Rigoletto in 1851 and Simon Boccanegra in 1857 who confirmed La Fenice as the stronghold of the patriotism of the Risorgimento. The only sensational exception was the failure of La Traviata in 1854. The historic curtain, painted in 1878, with a representation of the announcement of the victory at Lepanto, linked the new national order to the older history of the city. It had been a triumphant epoch, which has left us with the fascination of things remembered and a wealth of silent witnesses. Because, unlike every other art which preserves life, the theatre's life is made up of a continuous cycle of death, the intangible alternation of fire and water.